there, fight fans. It's John Pollock with you. Coming up, John Ramdian and Robin Black. They will be joining me to chat all of the big news of the day, including 2 new fights announced by the UFC. Frankie has an answer in regards to who he wants to fight next, and there's no shortage of pink paper being distributed by the UFC. A bomb was dropped courtesy of MMAfighting.com Wednesday that the UFC has cut 16 fighters, highlighted by Jon Fitch, who challenged for the welterweight title back in 2008. The other fighters receiving their notice include Mike Russow, Vladimir Matyushenko, Wagner Prado, Jacob Volkman, Shea Mills, Jay Huron, Terry Adam, Paul Sass, George Santiago, Mike Stump, Simeon Thorson, Josh Grisby, Matobu Tezuka, CJ Keith, and Ulysses Gomez, who read this news on Twitter. Ariel Helwani was on UFC Tonight Tuesday and stated that when speaking to former UFC lightweight champion Frankie Edgar, he's petitioning to fight Cub Swanson in his next featherweight bout. Edgar recently cut down to 145 pounds and went the distance with champion Jose Aldo at UFC 156 in a losing effort, while Swanson has put together a 4-fight win streak, including the W this past weekend over Dustin Poirier. More news coming out of UFC Tonight was the announcement of a lightweight bout between Donald Cerrone and incoming Strikeforce fighter KJ Noons. Both men are coming off losses, with Cerrone being stopped by Anthony Pettis in January on Fox, and Noons losing a controversial decision to Ryan Couture on the final Strikeforce card in January as well. The fight is set to take place at UFC 60 on May 25th. And that same Memorial Day weekend card has also added a light heavyweight bout between Ryan Bader and Glover Teixeira, according to Ariel Helwani. Bader last fought in January on the undercard of the Fox event, submitting Vladimir Matyushenko, and on the same card, Teixeira defeated Quinton Jackson by unanimous decision, setting up this light heavyweight tilt for Memorial Day weekend. But guys, huge breaking news here coming out of MMAfighting.com. 16 fighters cut by the UFC, highlighted, of course, by what is going to be the most debated cut, that by Jon Fitch, who challenged George St. Pierre back in August of 2008, and really, I think, caught a lot of people off guard.
Yeah, this absolutely makes no sense. Jon Fitch is still a top 5, top 10 welterweight in the UFC, and I think this is the way it goes down. Sam Kaplan calls Bjorn Rebney, says Jon Fitch is free. They make a call to Dwayne Zinkin and says, we need to get this guy into Bellator because he's still credible, and I think everybody still recognizes that he's a top welterweight. It's really baffling. The only reason they did this is because Jon Fitch made $66,000 and $66,000. And they feel that it's just too much money, obviously.
Hey, man, look on paper. You've got a draw with BJ Penn, then he gets knocked out, then he wins a decision, then he loses a decision. On paper, he's 1 win, 2 losses, and a draw. So on paper, this is a time to cut him. But that doesn't tell the story. This is a guy who, for more than the last half a decade, has been in the top 3 at 170 pounds. There's arguments over whether or not he's exciting, but what did you say, 66 and 66?
Yeah.
That's $132,000. You tell me you can't pay Jon Fitch $132,000. People go, oh, he's not exciting. People aren't excited to see him fight. When
he's facing the toughest guys in the world.
Fitch versus Maia, everybody was pumped to see it. It was a great fight. I don't know how you're going to have fighters that are committed to you. I don't know how you're going to keep them loyal when you show them no loyalty back.
I'm going to put on my hat that reads Devil's Advocate, that says Jon Fitch is nowhere near a title shot. Very dangerous welterweight who's simply killing off contenders if you put him in those situations. Case in point, Eric Silva.
Well, of course, but that's what happens in the sport. You can't guarantee anything. That's the way it goes. When the top guys are facing the top guys, you can say, well, we have a plan for Damian Maia. Boom! Nate Marquardt takes him out in 15 seconds. That's what happens in the fight game. You can't guarantee anything.
And hey, man, he is still in the UFC's own list, in their own, their approved list. He's the number 9 welterweight. So you're now going to cut anyone below 5, anyone below 1? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense.
Looking at the rest of this list, any ones that jump out at you? We had heard Jacob Volkman on Tuesday, followed by these. The facts here are that the UFC has an enormous roster right now. Way more. The current system they have right now with the amount of fighters, it works out to about 2 fights a year they can give guys, which is not ideal for these fighters.
Guys get injured. We were seeing that guys aren't fighting 3 times anyways because of injuries, because of the fact that the UFC has so many, they have so many obligations to Fox and their affiliates that fighters are simply not fighting 3 times a year anyways. There's only a select few. And you're telling me that people would rather see Mike Ricci versus Colin Fletcher than Mike Ricci versus Terry Edom? I think not.
Yeah.
But listen, everyone's going to come up with all these names of guys who are still on the roster, but you're kidding yourselves if you bring up some of these names and not feel that they are on the chopping block themselves. Colin Fletcher loses in Montreal. I will guarantee you he is cut too. I think we're going to get a lot more cuts. This is, to me, is just the beginning.
They were saying there were 75 to 100
guys is what they're looking at.
And that's, hey man, why are you signing so many if that's the case? Ulysses Gomez found out on Twitter, like you said, what is he, number 7 in their 125-pound division? If you only have 7 guys and you can cut one of them, that to me is just nuts. But hey, like I said, you're going to lose some credibility with these fighters. You're going to lose commitment to them when you just throw it out like that. And worse, they're acting like they're a monopoly, like they've acted for a long time. All of a sudden, Viacom is in this game. All of a sudden, there's World Series of Fighting who needs fighters. You're handing them fighters.
Yeah, and you talk about Ulysses Gomez. This is a guy who, yes, in his UFC debut, lost to John Moraga. Where's John Moraga right now? He's fighting for a title. And in his last fight, it was very, very close, a very subjective fight. You look at that and it's like, well, I don't really know who won that fight. If you look at the first round, Gomez definitely won the first round. It's the last 2 rounds that were subjective. And, you know, when you're cutting guys based on a subjective loss, it's unfortunate, especially when you're
But John, what do you do in this
division.
case? You're 100 guys over. I guarantee you, you of all people could make arguments for every single fighter on that list to have a job here. But you know what? It's not like you come in and say, these are the obvious guys that don't belong here. Of course you can make cases for these guys. These are tough decisions that you have to, if you have to cut your roster by 100, you're going to get some outrageous cuts that the people don't understand.
What it comes down to is actually bringing quality guys in. You look at other promotions, it's like, well, what top guy did they beat to get into the UFC? Yes, they have a 10-0 record, but they have no wins over notable guys. There are guys that have been in the UFC that are cut and fighting for Bama and fighting for Instinct. And as long as they can get a victory over a guy like Pat Healy or Ryan Healy, for example, like we look at Jesse Jesse Ronson. This guy has the credentials. He's fought tough guys and he's beat tough guys.
That's a great point too. All of a sudden, if you got to cut 100 guys, there's actually, you know, if you have 100 too many, there's 50 to 100 great young athletes out there right now. Not only do you not have room for them, you got to get rid of some of the ones that you have. That's your own error. I mean, hey man, we'd love to see all these guys fight, but it's a spooky situation. And take this into account too. They just released a list of 16. They could have done 3 tomorrow and 3 the next day. They said, this is who we're getting rid of. If you don't like it, you can lump it.
I think the best thing right now is for Bellator to take a look at that list. Look at the Terry Adams, the Paul Sasses, Jon Fitch, Jay Huron. You already have a storyline. He lost a split decision with their current champion, Ben Askren. Bring these guys in. I think it's good for Bellator.
Do you think it's a safe bet that most of these land in Bellator? Because I don't see Bellator necessarily just grabbing all the UFC
No, maybe not all of them,
10
but
of them, 8 of them.
you know,
Fitch makes sense, but outside of that, I don't know how many they take.
Adam makes sense. There's room for these guys.
All right, very hotly debated topic, and we will continue here on Fight News Now Extra.